Just give me the thumbs up when you're ready. I can move over some too, Dan. It's more helpful. Is that better? Good evening. Welcome. Welcome to the University of Detroit Mercy. My name is Sister Erin McDonald. I'm a sister of St. Joseph, and I'm also the University Minister for Service and Social Justice here at Detroit Mercy. So it's my pleasure to welcome you all here this evening, to welcome all of our online guests that are here with us virtually. We are very grateful to have you here with us this evening. We're very grateful to Father Joe and Father Dan for joining us and being willing to give this wonderful presentation. And so it's my honor to introduce our speakers this evening. First, we have Father Dan Corrou. Father Dan grew up in Saratoga Springs, New York, and graduated from Lemoyne College in 1994. After 2 years as a Jesuit volunteer teacher in Micronesia, he returned to the U.S. and earned a master's in theological studies at Harvard University. Before entering the Jesuits, Dan worked at Fidelity Investments, the Jesuit Volunteer Corps, and the College of the Holy Cross. As a Jesuit, Dan earned a master's in philosophy at the University of London and a licentiate degree, in sacred theology from Boston College. After ordination as a Catholic priest, he served at St. Francis Xavier Parish in New York, and he is now the regional director of Jesuit refugee service in the Middle East. So thank you, Father Dan, for joining us this evening. I would also like to introduce Father Joe Kassar. Father Joe is the country director of Jesuit Refugee Service Iraq. He has been such since February of 2016. Father Joe is born in Malta and entered the Jesuits in 1979. He was ordained in 1991. Since then, he has served in a variety of teaching, administrative, and pastoral assignments. His international and intercultural experience as a Jesuit repeatedly brought him face to face with the harsh reality of forced displacement. Following his first encounter with JRS in Nairobi, Kenya in 1984, Father Kassar worked in emergency famine relief and in multi-sectoral project among forcibly relocated persons in Ethiopia in 1985 and 86. Later, during studies in Rome, he volunteered with JRS Italy in the international office. Father Kassar was the founding director of JRS Malta, where he spent another term in 2008 to 2011. He is a member of the Euro-Mediterranean province of Jesuits. And so I'd like to welcome Father Dan. I think, will you be starting us off? Excellent. So it's my pleasure to welcome Father Dan and Father Joe. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a great joy to be with you all, a real privilege and honor. In particular, I want to give a few shout outs to my Jesuit volunteers over here, correct? Great, thank you. As a fellow JV, you're doing amazing work and exactly where you need to be. So thank you for that. And to my Jesuit brothers, I see many of you here. Thank you for being here and supporting the cause and the work that's going on. A real gift to have you here as well. And also one of the great joys of being here the last few days has been getting to know the Iraqi community here in Detroit. And so I want to thank everyone from the Chaldean Foundation, but particularly Isaac and David for the great welcome that you offered to us in the last few days. So thank you. It is a great joy to be here tonight. It's a great joy to be here at this Jesuit University, to be able to share the beautiful common narrative of our Ignatian tradition. To be able to say that the beautiful work that we do here, to be women and men for others, to be students of excellence, to do education at the highest levels, and to say that that education has to make real sense to people living on the margins, and that all of that education directed at the needs of the people on the margins has to be grounded in this great, beautiful depth of spirituality, the spiritual journey that we walk together, this Ignatian tradition that we gather together. And so it's a great joy to be able to gather to join with my brother, Joe Kassar. We've come over and we've been here for a couple of weeks. I'm coming in from Beirut. He's coming in from Erbil. It's taken a few days to get our feet under ourselves and to sort of arrive and to get back to being an American here for a few weeks. But it's a great joy, and I was talking to my staff today and really looking forward to getting back there, getting back to work. But we gather here together to share some of the story of what we're doing as JRS in the Middle East. So this evening we begin with a photo. The photo up there is one of our social workers in Beirut. On August 4th, 2020, there was the largest non-nuclear explosion in history that happened just about a kilometer away from our office. And we use that photo to begin because I think this shows the beautiful example of our Ignatian tradition. Here, one of our social workers, an extraordinary woman who'd been working for many years with JRS, accompanying Syrian refugees who had arrived in Lebanon. Her response, and the response of all of our social workers and teachers after this enormous blast that destroyed offices and the school where we were, was not to run away in fear, but was to go out into the streets. Rather than being a social worker where people came to her office, she became a social worker on the streets. Rather than being teachers that had the students come to their classrooms, they went out onto the streets. And that is a beautiful gift of our Ignatian tradition. It is always on the move. It is always creative. It is always looking for the new. What is the next step? And so we gather here with Fatima, with all of our social workers, and we begin with prayer. Back in April of this year, Pope Francis came to visit Iraq. A beautiful and prophetic move to say that every country deserves our attention, that there is no one who is forgotten. Father Joe had the good fortune to meet him after the Mass, and I wanted us to begin today as people of goodwill with a prayer. We begin this gathering with the words of Pope Francis as our prayer. And so we take a moment to rest in the loving embrace of God. Now, while we are looking forward to a slow and arduous recovery from this pandemic, there is a danger that we will forget those who are left behind. The risk is that we may then be struck by an even worse virus, that of selfish indifference, a virus spread by the thought that life is better if it is better for me, and that everything will be fine if it is fine for me. It begins there and ends up selecting one person over another, discarding the poor and sacrificing those left behind on the altar of progress. The present pandemic, however, reminds us that there are no differences or borders between those who suffer. We are all frail, all equal, all precious. May we be profoundly shaken by what is happening all around us. The time has come to eliminate inequalities, to heal the injustice that is undermining the health of the entire human family. Amen. Amen. We are all frail, all equal, all precious. I think that's an important thing for us to remember. I am very conscious our work as JRS is to put JRS out of business. That JRS exists is a sign of sin in the world. I want my office to close, but it will only close when there are no more refugees and everyone is welcome and everyone belongs. That is our real work, and that's the work that we do here. As we think of our work as JRS, yes, we serve. And we can talk about the schools, we can talk about the social workers, we can talk about all of the programs that we run. We do that. That is essential. We also accompany. We don't do that as the grand masters taking care of the poor little ones. We do that as sister and brother, frail, broken, precious, beloved, equal, walking together. But we are also grounded in that essential work of advocacy. How is it that we can, in particular, I as an American coming back to the United States, am very aware, what is our role in this beautiful, powerful, strong country, this beautiful and broken country, What is our role as advocates for a different world, for a better world, where JRS can be closed and I can go to a different job? And as we do this, I was reminded of this photo. I was in our office in Syria, in Homs, about a month and a half ago. And on the wall of the office there, they have this photo, which I love. It's a photo not too far from one of the schools that we have in Homs, Syria. And in the background, downtown Homs looks pretty much like that even today. The battles of Homs finished probably 5 or 6 years ago. But downtown is still not rebuilt, and it still is in mostly rubble. And yet, the students wake up in the morning, and their parents make sure that they're dressed, and they're washed, and they're clean, and they've got their homework, they've got their books, and they go off to school with great joy. And I think this reminds us of that great balance in which we live. There is the reality of sin and destruction, that reality of the forces that tear us apart in the background. And yet the beautiful gift that I learned, that Father Joe learns every day from the refugees we accompany, is that we still get up in the morning. We still continue the work. We still continue the joy. We move into ever greater peace, love, joy, happiness. We move always into that. And as I was reflecting on this photo, I was reminded of the line from Father Pedro Arrupe. Pedro Arrupe founded the Jesuit Refugee Service in 1980 in response to the boat people leaving Vietnam. Images very reminiscent of what we saw just a few weeks ago, people leaving Afghanistan. And we can talk about the JRS work that was happening in Afghanistan before all of that later. But as Father Arrupe was looking at those images, it was twofold. It was, on one level, it was to name the reality of our world, the brokenness, the division, the fear, and the violence of our world. But also to see that there was great hope in that. Those people were aspiring to something else. They weren't giving in to failure and defeat. That they were walking the next mile. They were continuing the journey. They were going together, much like these children. What do the refugees of the world? Refugees tell us the state of the world, and we must communicate that. It is twofold. Yes, there is destruction. Yes, there is that violence. And yes, there is still hope. We get up in the morning and we continue the journey. The violence and the destruction is clear. We can go through the statistics. There are today more refugees than ever before on the face of the earth, 84 million. There are another probably 50, 60 million internally displaced people all around the world. We think of those refugee numbers in terms of how they affect us in the United States or in Europe. However, 86% of those refugees are housed in the countries that are themselves developing, that are themselves poor, that do not already have enough resources for their own people. 86% of those refugees. These are not numbers that are coming to the United States or Europe. I think very distinctly of our situation in the Middle East. There are 6.5 million Syrians who left Syria. Syria, before the war, was a country of 22 million people. 6.5 million people have left. Another 6 million continue to be displaced within Syria. More than half of their population is not living in their own homes right now. And that continues and has been continuing for 10 years now. In Iraq, we still have, 7 years after the ISIS-Daesh crisis, we still have 1.2 million people who cannot return to their homes, who are living in or around camps. 1.2 million people. These are staggering numbers. And the percentage number that I want to really highlight, when I was working in Lebanon in 2011 and 12, the Syria war had started. And there was a particular moment in that war when the Syrians decided that they had to leave. And there was a 6-month window. Now, Lebanon is a 4 million person, the population of Lebanon is 4 million people. It is a tiny country. In 6 months, 1.5 million Syrians entered and tried to find housing. That is 33% of their population. In the United States, the population of refugees here is 0.8%. In Lebanon, it is 33% of the population. When they were first arriving, every bridge had Syrians living under it. Every abandoned building had Syrians living in it. Every space that they could find, people were shoved into those spaces. So I want to make the very strong argument that, yes, we think about refugee and migration issues in terms of the United States, but the real impact is on the people closest to that. When we talk about 50,000 Afghans coming to the United States, there are 750,000 Afghans already in Iran. There are over 1 million in Pakistan. 50,000 is nothing. These are countries that already have their own economic problems. As we think about those numbers, it is important for us to keep that all in perspective. As a Jesuit institution, I think it's important for us to talk about the foundation of our work and the balance of the work that we do together. In Ignatian spirituality, there is always this balance that we walk. Now, of our staff, we have nearly 800 staff spread throughout the Middle East in the 4 countries where we work, in Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, and Iraq. The vast majority of them are Muslim. We have lots who are Yazidi, the religious minority in northern Iraq, and lots who are Druze in Lebanon. But the vast majority of them are Muslim. And so when I try to explain what it is to be a Jesuit institution to a crowd that is mostly Muslim, I begin with what they know. I begin with Quran Kareem. I begin with Quran. I begin with Islamic spirituality. And so I just want to highlight some of the things that I think are important and foundational to our work as JRS, exactly similar to the foundation of our work as a Jesuit institution here. In that first part, it is from the Surah Al-Kahf in the Quran. It is this beautiful line, وَنَحْنُ أَرِيبُ عَلَيْهُمْ مِنْ حَبْلِ الْوَرِيدِ. We are closer to them than the jugular vein. God, who knows every one of us, loves us so much that God wants to be right there, snuggled up right next to us. You are worth being close to. And so is your neighbor. Your neighbor is worth being close to. You cannot abandon your neighbor. God has said that I am closer to you than your jugular vein. You be that to your neighbor. Do not abandon them. You walk together on this journey. And so there is this profound intimacy, this profound closeness. And that is balanced, and that closeness is that beautiful image of the incarnation. God so loved the world that God wanted to be part of us, to be born into the messiness of what it is to be human, into the brokenness of what it was to be human. God wanted to be a homeless refugee born in the middle of nowhere. God so loved us that God wanted to snuggle right up beside us. We balance that with this next part. In Islamic spirituality, we hear a lot about Allahu Akbar. And if it was Allah al-Akbar, it would be God is the greatest, a thing out there. But it's not. In Arabic, it is God is greater, Allah Akbar. It is always more, always greater. It is a relative phrase. It is something that keeps us off balance. Whatever we think are the limits of God, they're bigger than that. Whatever the limits of God's love, it's greater than that. What are the limits of God's justice? It's bigger than that. Whatever the limits of our small, tiny little world, whatever we're self-satisfied in, God's bigger than that and invites us to that as well. In Ignatian tradition, we talk about this as the magis, the ever greater, the ever deeper, the ever more. How am I moving into that creative instability that puts me just enough off balance that I can grow into ever greater relationship with God and the other? In the Gospels, we hear that beautiful story of Jesus inviting Peter out into the deep. Step out of the boat, get out of what is easy and comfortable, go into what is unknown. This is the foundation of our work. In very general, practical terms, this photo taken in the Bekaa Valley, clearly during COVID times. And in the midst of COVID, we continue our work. The basis of it is, as a good Jesuit institution, founded in excellence of education. How are we providing students with a quality education even in their displacement, even in the difficulties of their circumstances? What we're aware of is that we aren't just educating brains in a vat. We're educating children that have families. Many of those families have gone through terrible traumatic situations. Father Joe will tell some stories about the genocide in northern Iraq of the Yazidi. families that have seen absolutely atrocious things. I remember seeing children in their first drawings when they would come from Syria, the first thing that they would draw, the thing that was going on in their brains when they would close their eyes at night, were helicopters dropping barrel bombs. And so that's what they would draw. After 6 weeks, 2 months, 3 months, they would start to draw the flowers and their classmates playing football and things. They would start to become children again. But the images that they would draw required some processing. And so around that education, we have mental health work that is there to support both the children and their families. How are we creating people in places of health? How are we doing programs that allow for protection? Where are the areas where those children are vulnerable, where the families are at risk? So sometimes that's food, sometimes that's housing, sometimes that's community support. And then how are we doing the larger community reconciliation work, the community building? In Iraq, we had a visit from OCHA a few years ago. OCHA is a UN agency. They came to visit our programs with the Yazidi up in the north, and one of our program directors was explaining this sort of general framework. We have education, but it is all these other layers as well. And the representative from the UN said, "This is great. I've read some research about this idea of sort of holistic education." And so we got the report back about that, and I'm reading it, and I'm thinking, no shit. We've been doing this since 1548. This is Jesuit education. This is cura personalis. This is what we do as Jesuits. We do not just educate the brain. We take care of the whole person. That is what we're doing here at UDM. That's what we do at JRS. This is the foundation of who we are. Very quickly here, just a couple of quick notes on the situation in Lebanon and Syria. On the left, we have a recent distribution in the Bekaa Valley. In the Bekaa Valley, it is mostly camps. These are tented communities. In that particular day, we were doing a food distribution. Just outside of the photo there, you would see just the large UN tents. This is on one of our school grounds. We have a network of 8 schools throughout the Bekaa Valley, and the students come there. But the families also come there, and the food distributions, especially during COVID, as the economic crisis in Lebanon has increased. Lebanon right now is going through the worst economic crisis, according to the World Bank, the worst economic crisis on earth since 1850. The currency is completely devalued. There is no income, and any labor market has been devastated. The story that I tell about currency, we pay our staff in US dollars. On a cleaner at our place, at any one of our schools, earns $300 a month. Before that, it was okay. Before 2 years ago, it was a decent salary for a cleaner. We still pay in US dollars. The exchange rate has so fluctuated and so changed that a general in the army still gets paid in Lebanese lira. The value of that used to be very high. They would get a good salary. Today, the cleaner who makes $300 a month at our place has more buying power at the end of the month than a general in the Lebanese army. Their economy and currency has been so devalued. Now that scares me, because if a general who has access to lots of weapons isn't getting enough to feed his family, there are serious security concerns. On the right, you see, in response to COVID, our teachers all throughout the region, this photo is taken in Aleppo in northern Syria, they had to be creative. And so they had to do something different rather than the students coming to classrooms. And so they went out and visited the students. They went to the different places and took the homework, handed out pamphlets for the next week, and the students continued their work. Just a quick outline of some of the issues that are facing. I was emailing back and forth with our program director, Nada, who's out in the Bekaa Valley at one of our other programs out there. We were talking about something completely different, and I just said, I'm going to go talk to these folks in America. Can you give me a general outline of the issues you are facing today? She runs 3 schools and a community center for us. On that particular day, they had no electricity, either from the state or from their own generator, because they couldn't afford fuel. Because there was no fuel. Even if they could afford it, there was no fuel to run the generator. Earlier that day, this is in Baalbek, they had several shootings on the street for one reason or another, sort of an old frontier town. So this happens, but it's happening more often now. There's more tension, more insecurity. She has kids that need to get from home, point A to point B, and they walk through these areas where there have been numerous shootings. Increasing costs for everything, absolutely everything, the cost was increasing. Food shortages. For the first time that anyone can remember, there are bread lines in Lebanon, an otherwise middle-income country. Now they will send grandma to go and stand in the line for 6 hours so that they can possibly buy bread by the end of the day. And there are medicine shortages. People with heart conditions, people with high blood pressure, there's just nothing, not even Tylenol, Panadol available. And yet, I do want to highlight, it isn't all just despair. On the left, this is our center outside of Beirut in Borj Hamoud, and the students still come to the center. There is still work happening. There is still community being formed. And I think in response to COVID, we have to do it smartly and we have to do it intelligently. But we do continue to have to do the very real work of building community. We have to be able to gather people together again and do it in a smart way, but in order to break down those barriers, to reduce that sense of fear, and to continue to build that sense of community. With that, highlighting some of the things in Lebanon and Syria, I'm going to hand it over to Joe. He'll walk us through some of the things in Iraq. Multiple things here, so that's...
Thank you all for being here this evening. I'm especially energized to see young people and to see volunteers. I myself worked with university students as volunteers for several years. I really, thumbs up. If I had a hat to take off, I would say hats off, but I have no hat to take off. I'm also likewise very, very grateful to all of you who have attended this evening's thing. I realize that this event comes during the semester break or whatever it is. So thank you very much for still taking the time to be here, and also to our Jesuit brothers who have joined us this evening. We draw a lot of energy from that kind of fraternal support. So thank you very much. As Dan was saying, I've been in Iraq coming up close to 6 years. JRS in Iraq started 7 years ago now in October 20. And when I first got there, I thought to myself, okay, maybe JRS will be around for 2 years, 3 years, perhaps 5 years at the most. Well, we're coming up to 7 years. We don't usually celebrate the setting up of JRS Iraq on that day of the 20th October of 2014. There isn't much to celebrate, because that was in response to the horrendous events that had taken place in August of 2014, the 3rd of August, when the Yazidi genocide in the Sinjar region in northern Iraq had started, subsequently on the 6th of August, when all the Nineveh plains and many Christian villages and towns were emptied of their people as ISIS overran all the area, together with several other people of different ethnic groups who were driven out of their homelands by the self-proclaimed Islamic State. And this is how JRS came into being. JRS in Iraq, a response to people forced to flee their homes, a response that grew. We are currently focusing on 2 main locations. One is within the Kurdistan region of Iraq in a place called Sharia near the Hook. The other one is based in a place that was visited by Pope Francis on March the 7th this year, a small Christian town called Karakosh, but it is the largest Christian town in Iraq. And that is where many people who had fled the Nineveh plains came from, and therefore we continue to somehow or other support this group, not only because they were Christian, but because we have worked with everybody, Muslim, Yazidi, and other people of other faiths, but because it represented the journey with the people while they were displaced and as they tried to rebuild their lives again. These 2 pictures show us 2 different moments from our project in Sharia. The first shows a teacher with a little girl, and these are some resources that JRS puts out. But the only thing is that the encounter of the teacher with the girl is not taking place in the school, but rather near the home of, near the place of displacement where the family is living. Throughout the last 18, 19 months or so, it has been very difficult for us to conduct in-person education, as in many parts of the world. The children who come to our we run 2 kindergartens, one in Karakosh, which is smaller, about 50 kids, and the other one in Sharia, which is about 220 kids, to give a head start to children who would otherwise be roaming the streets and have nothing to do in the tents where they live, or in the unfinished buildings where they live. So this girl is being visited by a JRS teacher in a program which we called School Comes to You. The children were not allowed to come to our center because of COVID restrictions. So the same teachers who were joining our family visitors to visit the family and also to help us, because we needed many extra pairs of hands to take food aid, to take anything from blankets to plastic sheeting to cover the tents, to water tanks, to emergency rechargeable lights, heaters and whatever. We needed several extra hands because all these distributions were being done in person, door-to-door delivery from our center to the places where people live. The girl is being visited by the teacher. The teachers went around, visited 5 kids a day, and would leave some homework and pick up the activities that the children would have worked on before, and then start all over again once the round had been completed. Accompanying people is central to the mission of JRS. If you look at the mission of JRS, we have 3 foundational pillars: to accompany, to serve, and to advocate. Serve we do indeed, but to accompany may be at times vague. We try to give it concreteness through a lot of programs, but especially by being close to the people. So there is nothing really in what we do that is just designed on desks or whatever, you know, or comes out of humanitarian textbooks. We do follow the humanitarian principles and guidelines and try to adopt the highest standards in what we do, but what we do is informed by the experience of people and the requests that come directly from them. The second one represents one moment that bridges 2 different interventions, and that is a sewing class for women. But many of the women who do take the sewing class are themselves genocide survivors who are dealing with enormous problems inside. Deep trauma, so many different situations of people who have been either held captive by ISIS or have survived, but have seen, for example, their loved ones being taken away, never to be seen again. Still more than 2,000 Yazidis are missing, and their whereabouts are unknown. Some may be still living and are known to be living, while others may have been killed. It is impressive when one visits the Sinjar district of northern Iraq. There are mounds of earth surrounded by a very small, a very low fence, you know, just a few posts on the ground, a few metal posts on the ground with some netting to designate an area which is as yet an unexhumed mass grave. And this was in 2014. And how many times before had we heard never again, never again? And yet it happened. The never again, if we're not careful enough, even in our Western countries, will happen over and over again, because the causes that lead to that are still with us. Our efforts, I would say, really pale into insignificance when compared to the issues and problems that people are dealing with. But one of the ways, I think, one of the ways in which we respond so relevantly to what people on the ground are facing is because practically all my colleagues have themselves been through displacement. Out of about 136 colleagues, only 4 of us are foreigners. All the rest are Iraqis. Even those who are not right now displaced have at some moment in their lives either been refugees, displaced before, or have had their family being affected by the reality of displacement. One of my colleagues in the video clip that follows speaks about his own experience, but also the experience of his people, the Yazidi, and what he is trying to do about it as a member of the JRS staff. So just two more pictures. So the one on the left is what Sinjar city looks like today. There's still a lot of devastation, so people cannot go back. And the other one is when Father Dan and I were visiting people who are still displaced on the Sinjar mountain. Let's go to the video.
My name is Corrou and I'm Yazidi. Yazidis is a peaceful religious ethnic minority with a history of 6,000 years. I'm 33 years old. I have lived through genocide. The last one was on the hands of the ISIS. On the 3rd of August 2014, we heard that the ISIS are attacking southern areas of Sinjar Mountain. We heard the teams, we saw the ISIS members on the way. I could remember the scream of my mom screaming, of my sisters that they were saying they will come to kidnap us. In that day, ISIS did many crimes against the Yazidi people. They killed around 1,190 persons. They kidnapped more than 6,400 people, most of them children and women. But thank God we could be able to flee out to Kurdistan. And 7 years later, me and my family, we are living here. There is no efforts from the government to find a safe ground or dignified ways for the people to return to their areas. As I was young, I found that it's my duty to stand with my community and advocate on their rights. I am a protection and education director at JRS MENA in Kurdistan, Iraq. The JRS mission is to accompany, serve and advocate for the people. We are going to the office around Sharia. Each month we have 100 food basket and hygiene kits to provide to the 100 families here in Sharia collective and in various around. It's very important to be close to those families, to accompany them, to give them hope that there is some organization, some people are caring about them and trying to provide them their needs. The people that JRS currently servicing more than 20,000 people. The purpose of the project that we have here in Sharia to provide the education services, protection and mental health, social support for the people, and also looking for the justice for their rights. We're providing cash assistance in terms of mental health. We are providing the medication. We providing them with the legal services. We are providing transportation for the student in education. We have a kindergarten to receive 220 children per year. We have a youth education program for the student of the grade 9 and grade 12. And also we have the adult education course, which is English and literacy and computer. Besides that, we have skills training courses in terms of sewing, wiring, confectionery, and hairdressing courses. Through the JRS advocacy work is selecting the issues of easily missing persons to have interventions and raise this issue to the international community. Also bring attention to the situation of Christian Yazidis. For the Yazidis, I hope that this year will be the last year of the dismissal, and hopefully those people will return to their home in a safe and dignified way. They deserve peaceful, they deserve a good life, they deserve a life like others. I try and I'm still trying to be a voice of my community. I think it's very important missions that JRS has here in Iraq and around the world to give the people hope, to make them stand for their own future.
With that, I got to know Talal. I was there just about a month ago. And the work that he's doing as the program director for our friends online here. The work that he's doing is amazing, and the passion he has for the real work of creating a world where everyone is at home is a beautiful thing to see. And that, I hope, is what brought you out here tonight. I know there's a lot going on. I know that we all have a lot of other things to be doing. What gives me great hope is that people in our visits here in the United States, earlier today we had a Zoom meeting with members of the House Foreign Relations Committee, with the Senate Foreign Relations Committee a few days before that. People are interested in what is happening. People in the United States, in this beautiful yet broken country, have the possibility of doing amazing work. And that people are interested in the stories we're telling, that they're interested in being partners with people like Talal is a beautiful thing. And so I'm just very, very grateful for that. Father Joe and I are very grateful for your presence here, your participation, for everyone at UD Mercy for being open to hosting us this evening, and for the Jesuit community for hosting us these days. We're very grateful. There are many ways that we can continue to be partners with Talal. One, and we're very grateful for any donations people are able to make. This work takes a lot of money, and we get some government funds, but we rely on the generosity of our friends and our partners. But I also, and I, again, having been back in the United States these days, after several years, it has struck me so much the power that we have to do very real work in our country. This is a beautiful country with amazing goals and beautiful dreams, with amazing possibilities. And I look back at my own ancestors who came here from the failures of the economy in Ireland and Germany, who came afraid of war, and who found a place where they could really make a difference and they could make a beautiful life. We can do that here, and we can also be agents of that in the rest of the world. Be advocates for that. Be involved in that. Josh in the back here has material where you can sign up to the website, JRS, and get materials, newsletters, alerts around immigration, refugee issues globally that JRS is involved in. Get involved there. Listen to what's going on. Be involved. Get active there. I think of the Ignatian Solidarity Network here in the United States. All of our Jesuit universities are part of that. This is a place to both learn and then advocate for that real, just, sustainable world. So, very, very grateful to all of you. It's wonderful to have you here. Thank you very much, and I look forward. I'm happy to entertain any questions from here. Thank you. Father Joe and I are very happy to take questions as is helpful. Great, yeah, Nora.
So,
elevated even farther because you're there to stay and you're there to be part of the solution. And if you could just repeat the question so that people online can pick it up.
Excellent.
Or summarize. Thank you.
The question was a very good question, whether the recent developments or changes in American military presence, I'm assuming you're talking about Afghanistan? Yeah. Okay. And throughout the region. So changes in U.S. military presence there, whether we're seeing a change in our work and whether we're seeing how we see our work in relation to that. Would that be a good summary? A couple different things. One, I would say we all watched the images from Afghanistan with fear and trembling. And what, in very general terms, what I will say is that JRS globally, I think, took very, very good care of our staff in Afghanistan. And being able to talk about that in detail with our staff in Syria and Lebanon and Iraq, if something were to happen because of U.S. military presence or otherwise, was a great consolation to them, to say that we're going to do what we can to figure out something if it gets really bad. But I think the most important thing for us, as Father Joe mentioned, is that we don't have foreign staff. I mean, we're two of the maybe 6 or 7 regionally of international staff that are not from those particular countries. They're not leaving. They've made the decision. Our assistant country director, Saleh Mohammed, assistant country director in Syria, he will tell the story. All of his friends have left. They're all gone. A change in U.S. military presence around Syria isn't going to change his decision to say, whatever happens, I'm staying in my country to fix it. I'm not leaving for the options of getting something better. I'm going to stay here and try to fix that. So it was an added trauma on top of everything else. But on one level, it hasn't changed the resolve, certainly of the staff that I've talked to. Do you want to say anything?
Likewise, I can also name many of my colleagues who have made that decision to remain. Our speaking tour here is called Restore and Remain. And I think remaining from the side of our staff who could have possibly access, to some other connections, either via us or somebody else, to try to relocate. We're not in the relocation or resettlement business. But rather, we try to be there so that people who are displaced in their own countries may be enabled to stay. I think that is something very important. As far as U.S. foreign policy is concerned, well, I cannot really shift it or do much about it myself. But my desire is that if there is an American presence in whichever country, Iraq included, that it is always a presence that is there as a force for good, rather than as a military occupation force, as a force for good. And I believe that this country has all the resources it takes to be a force for good.
What's your sense of the future of the two countries, Iraq and Lebanon? What's going to happen? Let's guess.
Do you want to tell the future?
Yes, I have no crystal ball.
Do you want to repeat the question?
Yes, okay. The question was, what is my sense of the future for the two countries in which we're working, Lebanon and Iraq? Let me start in Iraq. I don't have a crystal ball. I never had a crystal ball, and I will never have a crystal ball. I pray. I pray every day during Mass that God's glory may shine on this country, meaning Iraq. And I leave it up to Him. I don't know which way things are going, but I do my own personal best, and as JRS, our best with all my colleagues, so that the future will be better. One of our stated aims is, and there are 3 aims which we set ourselves as JRS in Iraq, so that we can also give more embodiment to the accompany, serve, and advocate. We say our mission is first and foremost to uphold and restore the dignity of forcibly displaced persons. Second, to show compassion to the most vulnerable among them. And third, to be a sign of hope that a shared future is possible. My hope is that a shared future is possible. And I personally will do whatever it takes so that JRS can participate in building this shared future, which is ultimately what Pope Francis invited everybody, all people of goodwill in Iraq to contribute to a shared future of hope.
And I would just say, I see signs of great hope day in and day out. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to get out of bed in the morning. The numbers in Lebanon, the economic numbers, are devastating, and I don't think this is going to be a good 5 years. It's going to be very painful. And that has tremendous impact on Syria as well, where we have major operations. But I see people still doing the work, the teachers still show up to run the classes, they still show up to be the social worker. Amazing, amazing work. That hasn't gone away just because the economic crisis or the blast or the COVID or any of that. The people are creative about this. The long term, I am hopeful. Short term, it will be a tough 5 years.
You talked a good amount about the fact that you're one of the, you're very different staff. It is a lot of culture there. You're not trying to people out of the Middle East, you're trying to help people rebuild. How do you think for us in the Western world who are not in the Middle East, who really aren't following the go to the Middle East, and we continue to advocate to whether how can we help bring others in to that circle when in a real reality most of us will not have connection.
My first response is get to know the immigrant population here. You've got a great, right in front of you, these guys run an amazing center for Iraqi and other immigrants who've come to the United States. If you want to know about immigration issues, talk to the people who are themselves immigrants, recent immigrants who just got here. That's, I think, an incredibly important thing for us as we look at what's going on in the United States right now. The other is to be available for things like this. And we, as I say, the majority of our staff, vast majority, very deliberately, are from Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, Iraq, but not exclusively. And actually, yesterday we got a tour of the Chaldean Foundation, and there are these two social workers. Now they're Iraqi Americans, but they're Americans, and I'm ready to pay to put them on a plane to fly them over to Iraq. And to have them be sort of expert social workers for us. They're not happy with me stealing their staff, but to take folks who are able to navigate the cultural questions, but who also have the skills that are available to someone in the United States. There are no social work programs in Iraq, zero. We're trying, the Jesuit University in Beirut has a social work school. We're trying to do some distance courses there. But at the moment, we can't get a qualified social worker. So there are those there are skills that people in the United States have, but I think that the best way for us to know that is to get to know our neighbor right here, right now. But a great question. Yep. Isaac.
How would he be able to be involved? So there's many forms of social media that you're involved in. And the best way in today's world is, understanding and marketing the need. There's a lot of ways to put that message on your contact list once you learn it and make people aware of it worldwide. We know what social media does today. And the same mechanism that you would use to connect with friends could be used to market or give people knowledge. So that's probably the best way to get more involvement from our youth. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Isaac. Great idea.
You're young students, and I know that many Jesuit universities and other universities offer immersion trips, experiences in the summer. COVID has not been the time, to do those, but should you ever get the opportunity, rise to the challenge. It's not only mind-changing, it's life-changing. I've accompanied for years groups of young people going to, especially to Eastern Africa, and in particular Ethiopia. And they always come enriched by the encounter with other people. always setting out with the idea that they're going to give, and do, and they come back thanking people for what they have received from them, and then thinking, what can I do so that this life-changing experience can also be something that other people can actually experience. So if you do get that opportunity, go for it.
We have an online question.
Great.
Roz asks, how do you help the refugees that were displaced as of late in the United States?
Excellent. So I'm assuming we're talking specifically about the Afghan refugees, and I know that there are two, at least, major military bases where a lot of that relocation, resettlement is happening. I know that JRS has staff members that are there. We have a lawyer at one of those facilities. I would check in at the website for JRS. I know that there's material on that. I am not involved in the resettlement questions, but I know that Josh here and on the website they would have material about that.
One more online question.
Great.
So this is from Maria. She says, given the vast number of refugees worldwide and many permanently, what would a just refugee/immigration policy look like? What would be some of the practical principles?
Practical principles, great. Honestly, the practical principles already exist. That return should be voluntary, that it should be sustainable, that we should not be forcing people to return to their homes before it is ready. However, I think the policy from our side, from the wealthy countries of the world, is to what do we need to do in order to make sure on levels of security, livelihoods, general well-being, education, and healthcare, how are we making sure that the place to which people can return is indeed a place that you as a human being would return? And so I think this is where it isn't just a policy question, it is a general question of development. How are we making an investment in the future of the world, in the future of our neighbors, in the future of our own safety? How are we making an investment by development of places where there is a refugee or displaced population? What I would say is that I think we need to be deliberate. I err on the side of saying that immigration to the United States is a beautiful thing. It's what got me and my family here. We were talking about this last night at the Chaldean Foundation. Like, there was extraordinary insight that came from the immigrant population into the United States. The thriving idea that we could come together and from very different places we could create something new and extraordinary. And those children in that photo of coming out of the rubble, people who are leaving chaos, come with great hope. And I think if we can develop a place that is safe and allow that hope to be nurtured when immigrants arrive here for whatever reason, they can be extraordinary influences on this country and others as well. Do you have anything to...
Just one small note in terms of policy. I would say to be ready to invest much, much more in peace and building peace rather than in conflict. It's far too easier, much easier to try to seek solutions through conflict than through peace. Anything that can build a peace is always more difficult, but it is far more rewarding.
Very good with that.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So I'd just like to take this opportunity, sorry, I'm lined up in the camera here, to thank you all for joining us this evening. It's wonderful to be together, and I want to thank everyone who has joined us online this evening as well. We are grateful for your presence. I would also just like to take a moment to thank the many Detroit Mercy staff who helped to make this possible this evening. Certainly the Department of Architecture, our IT and AV staff, and certainly University Ministry staff and all of the good work they did to help coordinate this evening. I'd also like to thank the Jesuit community and the Office of Mission Integration, both of whom co-sponsored our event this evening. And of course, would like to say a big thank you to JRS, to Josh, to the staff of JRS, and to our wonderful speakers this evening. Thank you both. It's been wonderful to have you here and to share your message. So another round of applause for our speakers. Thank you. So this concludes our program for the evening, and there are some light refreshments in the back corner. You're welcome to them if you'd like to stay around. I suspect Father Dan and Father Joe would be glad to answer some questions if folks wanted to hang around for a few minutes, but thank you again.
Hope we didn't move around too much.
No, it was okay.